Hello and welcome. The overall health impact of COVID-19 seems to have reduced or is slowly diminishing, at least in countries like India. But the economic shocks continue, though there is economic recovery. One significant impact appears to be employment and unemployment. Almost 15 million jobs are still not to be found or have been lost between December 2019 and 2020, going into 2021. But more importantly, many of these jobs that were lost or have been lost are to do with young people as well as women, and the proportions seem to be considerably high. Women, for instance, are about 11% of employment, but they represent almost 52% of total job losses. The figures for young people are also not very encouraging, but on the other hand, older people seem to have increased their employment numbers overall. The question really is, why is this happening, and does this portend some structural shifts, or is it something which is still an after effect or an aftershock of COVID-19's economic impact? To discuss this, I'm joined by the author of an article which talks about this, Mahesh Vyas, Managing Director of the Center for Monitoring of Indian Economy. Mahesh, thank you very much for joining us. So first question, take us through what the overall employment numbers were, where we've come to now, and why this particular number that we're looking at, 15 million, is significant.
You see, when the lockdown began first, when the economy was effectively shut down, there was an understandably large increase in job losses. And that meant actually people who had employment lost that employment, although it was informal in nature. So forget about people having confirmed jobs or permanent jobs who also lost jobs. But all the people, or almost all the people who had informal jobs in the unorganized sectors, were, because of the lockdown, out of a job. These people are mostly paid on a daily wage basis. They were paid on the basis of number of hours worked or piecemeal basis. All of them lost their jobs and lost livelihood. But as the economy opened up, these people started getting their jobs again. It looked like a fantastic recovery as well. But gradually we saw that the more permanent jobs, the salaried jobs, losses in that category increased and then sustained itself. And that was worrisome, that although the jobs came back, the quality of jobs coming back was not as good. Now, this was the story in May, June, July, and slowly we saw that recovery process in terms of employment petering out. But what we see at the end of 9 months, which is a fairly long period after the severe lockdown that we had initially, what is the stock taking that we can do now? And we found that even now, on a base of about 405 million jobs, we have a deficit of 15 million jobs. It's not a small number. It's nearly like a fairly large chunk that still does not have jobs even after 9 months. Forget about the population growing and the need for us to grow jobs. This is one part of the story. But we see that job losses, no matter which way you cut it, is of a distressing kind. Like it is the urbanites who are losing jobs more than rural jobs. It's women who are losing jobs more than it's women losing jobs more than men losing jobs. It's graduates and postgraduates losing more jobs than the others who are losing jobs. It's youngsters losing jobs and not the older people. The composition of this loss of jobs is worrisome. Now, if we have got an aging population, if we have got employment shrinking in urban places, if the better educated graduates and postgraduates are the ones who are losing jobs, how can we recover the economy from the downslide that we have gone through? Right. So that, I think, is the biggest worry. We can say employment is back, but the nature of that employment recovery is such that it raises questions, and that's the point I want to make, regarding the recovery process and the sustainability of this recovery process.
Right, and I'm going to come to that in a moment. But if I were to go back to the top number that you shared, you said about 405 million jobs is the stock. At 15 million, we are saying it would be less than 5%. So in a broad sense, while it is important and significant, obviously, those who've lost jobs, but in the larger scheme of things, given the fact that we've faced such a huge economic shock, why wouldn't that number still be a small one?
I would say that We need to recover those jobs and we require to grow jobs. Mind you, population continues growing. We are not seeing a slowing down of that in a significant way. People are still coming into the labor force. We have to recover at least the jobs lost, which is equal to saying that the GDP has come back to where it was 9 months after the story, given that the incomes have come down. If you add incomes having come down and there being 5% or 4% loss of jobs, the impact is very large. I think this is a big deal because there is too much talk currently of recovery, like electricity generation is back to pre-COVID levels. India's export and imports are back to pre-COVID levels. Our wheat production is going to be record this year. The Kharif crop was very good. The Rabi crop is very good. All this makes it look, GST collections are very good. All this makes it look like as if we are back to where we were supposed to be. I'm trying to just say that's not exactly true. This recovery process is on thin ice. So it's not a small thing when I say that 4% of the jobs are still deficit compared to where we were in 2019-20.
Right, and could there be a value that we could ascribe to this 4% versus the other 96%?
That would require us to know what the wage rate is and broken up by the various wage categories. We are still working on that. It will take a little time, maybe a month or maybe 6 weeks or so before we can tell you what is the value in terms of incomes being lost. That's the question that your question translates to.
Right, but it would definitely be higher because you're saying that these are urban jobs and many are also salaried jobs as opposed to non-salaried.
Oh, yes. All the jobs which are being lost are higher valued jobs, and therefore the money impact of these job losses is higher than the employment loss. And that's right. Beside the fact that wage rates have fallen. We know that wage rates have fallen.
Right. So if we were to look at, let's say, the impact of COVID now, which let's say has affected many industries, and some of those industries may not or may structurally shift in composition, particularly when it comes to labor and so on. Do you think that could be happening here, and therefore if employment were to come back, it would really be in newer sectors or different areas, or is this something that we are still hoping will be a kind of return to normalcy?
There is research done by academics using the CMIE data, which does indicate that there's a structural shift. And I don't think that structural shift is by design, but it is per force. A person who had a salaried job, when she lost that job, she took up employment as a self-employed person. Now, is this a structural shift? When this happens in a large way, I call it a structural shift. There are many such movements of labor from formal organized sector to informal and unorganized sectors. This is not a very happy structural shift. So I don't think we will call this a very good thing to happen. It's not like people who are working in airlines are now working in the food industry. Surely that's also happening. And that's a perfectly fine thing to happen if airlines are not going to work for some time and food is going to work much better. Like many shops that were selling clothes are now selling food, which is okay. That is a structural adjustment. But a bigger structural adjustment that is kind of distressing is people moving away from salary jobs per force into unorganized jobs, into self-employment.
Right. Let's talk about women for a moment. 11% of total employment, but 52% of total jobs lost. Now, why is this number, first of all, higher? And then, considering that we are already seeing a decline of women in the workforce, what is the longer term or the medium term impact this could have socio-economically?
You see, the impact is very simple. It's lost opportunity. We don't see that. Men in India are working to reasonably good capacity in the sense that their participation in labor is close to 74%, 73 to 74%, and you don't easily go beyond that. And I'm talking of all ages above 15. So obviously some people will be retired and not working. So I think 73 to 74% of the men working is like tops. You can't increase the labor force beyond that. So where is India's potential sitting? It's sitting in the very low labor participation rate of women, which is close to around 10%, 11%. Now, if this falls, we are losing huge growth opportunities. But what we have seen is whether it is demonetization or GST or now the lockdown, the hit is taken in a big way by women. What we have seen is that the women who left the labor force post demonetization did not come back. And it took more than some 3 or 4 years, it took more than 3 years at least, for women to start coming back into the labor force, and that was the new cohorts which were entering the labor force that came in. So we saw for 2019, 3 waves of 2019 that women in the age group of 20 to 24 coming into the labor force at increasing rates. And then came the lockdown and all of them have gone out. So we are suffering a lot as women move out, and that has a big impact upon India's growth potential.
Right. So there's been some research and insights on why women are moving out of the workforce, but why are they moving out more from the workforce when we experience economic or in this case economic plus health shocks like this one?
I don't have an answer why they are. I observe that they are moving out and they're the first ones to move out. I think conditions become too adverse for them. Working conditions become a lot more adverse and they prefer to move out in these times. So, for example, a woman we know usually does more than one job if she's working. She is doing a job as an employment as a woman does, as a man does, and then she takes care of the home. In times such as COVID, if she falls ill because of the pandemic, she loses 2 jobs, that of taking care of kids and other work at home and the job outside. The man doesn't lose the job. So it's a pure economic decision making, rational decision making by the women that my time is a lot more costlier and it's better to take care of the hearth while the man can go out to work.
Right. Okay, now let me come to the other segment, which is young people. So young people seem to have lost more jobs proportionately, again, amongst this 15 million. But the only silver lining, if so, is that older people seem to have gained jobs. So is this a sign of experience coming back into the workforce or something else?
I don't think so. I think a more deeper, so this is the prima facie results we get from the numbers, but I think this is more a reflection of lack of jobs for people who do not have experience or are working in more vulnerable places. In the last 8 to 10 years, we have seen fixed term employment or contractual labor increasing a lot more. And people who are working on these conditions are working on more vulnerable jobs. And their relative lack of experience or in less experience demanding kind of jobs is seeing the hit over there. Whereas people who are of older age have got a better network that if they lose the job as a carpenter today, they know where to go and find a job of a mason because their network effects are much, much better. They're much more established. A 50-year-old person, a 40-year-old person working as a mason will quickly get a job of some other kind and is willing to work at a lower wage rate because he has to ensure that his family continues to get food on the table. Whereas a 25, 30-year-old something is still willing to say, I will wait for a better job to come in. So multiple things are in play over here as we see jobs come in for the more than 40 years compared to the less than 40 years. The net story is there are less jobs. The people who are more desperate, who are above 40, who have got a lot more at stake to bring money home, are the ones who are getting the jobs.
Right. Last question. So if you look back at the 9 months that have passed and look at the bounce back that we've seen, and we have seen one, what does this tell you in a larger sense? I mean, I know that as we've discussed, we've still got 15 million jobs to fill. And of course, as you said, the other taking care of the new workforce that will come in because of the population that is obviously growing. But is this something that is this a certain level of resilience that's good? And are you able to discern anything beyond how things could move or behave, particularly in the next, let's say, 6 months to a year?
Resilience, yes. Quality of jobs, questionable. So resilience comes by compulsions that families just cannot afford to stay without food. They have dug into their savings, not the top 2%, 3% of the income pyramid who have actually added to their savings because they don't have avenues to spend. But the rest of the pyramid have been digging into their savings. As they do that, they have to get back to work for whatever they can get. So if you call that resilience, sure enough, the economy has come back to shape in terms of many of those industrial activities starting up again, but paying low wages is resilience. But I think India is getting more informal and is losing on good quality jobs. So the jobs that you could get, say 15, 20 years ago, you could hope to get a good bank job, you could hope to get a good job in the financial markets at large or in an IT company. Those kinds of jobs are not growing. So the quality of jobs is deteriorating and the quantity of jobs is not growing. In this scenario, we have got some resilience.
Right. And so the other aspect of that question is, so therefore, what does this portend for the economy going forward, which is the next 6 months to a year?
It's difficult to predict on these bases what will happen in the next 6 months or 1 year. It's too short a period basis, right. These indicators. I think I'll still stretch myself to say that the economy's growth rate is unlikely to rebound the way, say, the government's 7%, the government's projections for this year is turning out to be, which assumes that the economy in the second half will be as good as it was a year ago. I don't think that's going to happen. We are still going to be in the negative zone in the remaining 2 quarters as well.
Right. Mahesh Vyas, thank you so much for joining me and sharing your thoughts.
Thank you.